Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
I've appeared in a couple documentaries, and I've been on TV a whole bunch of times too. And quite often, before you get filmed or shortly thereafter, they have you sign a release. So about 2 weeks ago, I signed a release to be filmed for a documentary. And I signed a document stating, I'm sitting here for this documentary. You're going to film me. And they have the right to use that film as they see fit. And the release you sign is often quite scary. It'll often say things like, you're waiving your right to come after us for libel, slander, or anything like that, defamation, bad light, whatever, if we do anything with this film that makes you look stupid. And sometimes they're worded quite like that, where they'll actually say, we can, if we want to, do all kinds of bad things with this film. Nothing you can do. And they do that for fear that people are going to come back later and say, I actually said 2 sentences and you only played one of them, and the missing sentence makes me look stupid. I'm going to sue you for that. So the releases are important, and like I said, I've signed many of them, but I read them before I sign them, and I have to, before I sign, make the mental calculation. How much do you trust these people? Do you trust these people? And so most of the documentaries I've sat for, in fact, I've already I've been involved in 2 this year so far, on 2 different topics, and I think I may have done 1 last year. But the point is that I've known the people doing the documentary well enough to where I trust them. And so I did a documentary about the Italian Hall disaster called Red Metal that was on PBS, and the director and producer of it is a very good friend of mine, Jonathan. And yeah, I read his release and I signed it. He could put anything. I don't care. I trust him. But the interesting question is, what happens in today's day and age with all the reality shows and contest shows and stuff, unscripted television, where they have people sign these releases? And you know how Hollywood is. You might not, but you can guess this. That as time has gone by, those contracts have gotten thicker and thicker and thicker. And I've seen some of them. They're mind-numbing, even to an attorney. So Tom sent me a note. Tom's a good friend of mine. Sent me a note last night. Said, Steve, did you see a story in the Hollywood Reporter? Defamation lawsuit against Netflix over docuseries allowed to proceed. There's a documentary series called Afflicted that is apparently on Netflix. And some people who agreed to appear on camera, who signed releases, are now wanting to sue Netflix for defamation. And Netflix went into court and said they signed releases. And a court has said doesn't matter. We'll get to that. Winston Cho wrote this for the Hollywood Reporter. A state appellate court has turned down Netflix's bid to dismiss the lawsuit brought by subject of docuseries Afflicted, who say they were defamed when the show misrepresented their chronic illnesses. In a unanimous decision from the Second Appellate District, the panel ruled that the consent releases the subject signed aren't enforceable because they were lied to and pressured to waive their rights not to be defamed. It found that plaintiffs can pursue claims over misrepresentation in documentary that were reasonably susceptible to an interpretation that defendants were portraying their illnesses and accompanying physical symptoms as not the result of an underlying diagnosable medical condition, but rather as either the product of their imaginations or some mental disorder. So the people who signed the releases were filmed and interviewed about medical conditions that they say they have. And they were led to believe, led to believe that this is about a documentary about these kinds of illnesses. And they now say that the documentary series made them look silly, it defamed them, and that they were lied to get them to sign those releases. And the court has said you can go to court on that and you will get a trial on that. At least it won't get thrown out now. Because quite often these cases get dismissed when somebody comes in and says, hey, they signed a release. And I've seen it before. A judge goes, did you sign that? Yes. Boom, case over. Like, done. So Netflix, of course, has had to do this before, defend themselves against defamation claims. Whether the other side is a police officer in a murder investigation or a close friend of the president, the streaming giant is being besieged by lawsuits alleging it's flouting libel laws. This is at least partially because of the interest in pushing nonfiction and true crime content, which regularly rank among the most viewed shows on Netflix. roughly 64 million households watched Tiger King in the first month of its debut in 2020, according to Netflix's own metrics. And more than 30 million tuned into Love is Blind during the same time frame. I've seen neither one. Thank you very much. Netflix is typically able to prevail in defamation cases, often early on, by pointing out that they are simply reporting things and utilizing a statute that compels the dismissal of lawsuits that attempt to chill free speech. It enjoys the same liberties as news organizations under the First Amendment, but a panel of 3 judges in the Second Appellate District rejected an appeal from Netflix to overturn a Los Angeles judge's ruling allowing subjects of Afflicted to proceed with claims that they were defamed in the documentary that they signed the releases for. The series explores people suffering from and attempting to treat chronic illnesses in addition to the struggles of their caregivers. One of the subjects suffers from Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune disease, and has been diagnosed with multiple chemical sensitivity. Another suffers from myalgic encephalomyelitis, also known as chronic fatigue. While some episodes seriously examine these issues, other episodes advance narratives that the conditions were actually psychosomatic. That is, all in your head. Afflicted had a controversial reception. There's an open letter to Netflix issued in 2018 signed by Lena Dunham and Monica Lewinsky, as well as doctors, scientists, and filmmakers who accused the streamer of misrepresenting chronic illnesses portrayed in the show. Documentary filmmakers typically enjoy the freedom to distort and manipulate storylines to weave cohesive narratives. And quite often, you'll hear stories about people who appear on reality shows, The Bachelor or Survivor, things of that nature. And I've read interviews with those people, and they often say that they shoot tons of material and not just edit it to get you the best pieces, but they'll often edit it to create a storyline or to create some kind of drama or to create some kind of arc. And so they'll actually get a clip of somebody saying something and go, that's interesting. See if you can find other clips of them elsewhere saying similar things. And they'll splice these things together to make it look like this person's all about this. When in reality, that's 2 minutes chopped out of 2 weeks of filming. So they do that, but everyone knows they do that. I would think, but you never know. So Afflicted production company Doc Shop Productions, which partnered with Netflix on the series, said that it obtained releases from the subjects who acknowledged that their portrayal in the series may be disparaging, defamatory, embarrassing, or of an otherwise unfavorable nature to plaintiffs and may expose them to public ridicule, humiliation, or condemnation. The agreement waived their right to pursue any and all claims, judgments, interest, demands, losses, liabilities, causes of action. But get back that first sentence. That sentence was in the document these people signed. And I've seen sentences quite similar to this. And that is, you're signing an acknowledgement that this documentary may present you or portray you in a disparaging, defamatory, embarrassing, or otherwise unfavorable nature to you. And people sign it and say, yeah, I'll do that. I'll be on TV. But the Second Appellate District found the releases were void. According to the order, producers represented the waivers as mere formalities or routine paperwork when there were comprehensive agreements signing away the parties' legal rights. They also falsely characterized the series as a serious documentary about chronic illness that would raise awareness of conditions and serve to educate the public. And the interesting point here is, did it say that anywhere in the release? Did it say, this is a series, it's going to be a serious documentary about chronic illness that will raise awareness? Did it say that? And of course it didn't. It didn't. But they're making the argument that we were told that, that's why we signed this document. And now, I will admit, I've never asked a documentary maker to rewrite their release for me. I never have. But if I was working with a total stranger on a topic that I thought could be twisted, I'd be tempted to look at that and say, well, you tell me this, but in writing you write this. Which is it? So the panel on appeal pointed to allegations that the showrunners presented the documents to the subjects at the last minute when they were too ill or tired to understand the significance of what they were signing. Statements that could be implied to constitute defamation include numerous statements from healthcare professionals who said that the subjects suffer from psychological issues rather than physical ailments, according to the order. So I'm going to stop right there with respect to this article. It's actually several pages long. It's quite lengthy. It's on the Hollywood Reporter, and Tom sent it. Winston Show wrote it. But keep in mind what's happening here legally. Somebody files a lawsuit against the documentary makers and against Netflix and says this documentary series defamed us. And the producers, who are the defendants in the case, go into court with a signed release and say, no, they signed a release. Everybody who appears on a documentary signs this same release. Industry standard, everyone does this. They signed the release. The trial court said, we're going to let this case proceed despite the signed releases. And we find that the signed releases were signed in a way that they shouldn't have any effect legally. So Netflix then appeals that to a court of appeals in California. And the court of appeals agrees with the trial court and says, based on what's before us right now, those releases might not be enforceable. Because keep in mind that a motion like this is not after a trial. There's no trial conducted for this. What happens is that these people file a lawsuit, Netflix files a motion to dismiss with a copy of the release, and then the plaintiffs, to buttress their position and to overcome that, probably submitted affidavits and sworn testimony saying, here are the circumstances in which we signed these releases. The question that's faced by the trial judge is, can the case proceed or should the case be dismissed? Trial court says case can proceed. Gets appealed, Court of Appeals says the same thing. Now, of course, this can go to California Supreme Court, but let's assume that eventually it winds up back at the trial court. Back at the trial court, it simply means there will be a trial. There will be a trial. And so at trial, the defendants are going to introduce this release and say, these people signed this release that said all of these things could happen to them. And of course, the plaintiffs will say, no, we signed it after being told X, Y, Z was true and this other stuff is not. And so there's going to be two positions on this. And a jury might come back and say, you know something, when you go onto a documentary film set and sign documents signing your life away, and you find out later that they portray you in the documentary in a way that you didn't like, but it says here you knew that was going to happen, you don't deserve so much for that. Or a sympathetic jury could say, gee, I've never been on TV before, but I wouldn't expect them to do that to me. And, if this release is a big, thick release with all kinds of language and that's buried in there somewhere, I might have missed it too. I might not have cared, or if I saw it, I might not have believed it. I might not have understood what it meant. I understand why they signed that release. I'm not going to hold them to that. So all this does is it keeps the lawsuit alive. But right now, I assure you, in California, despite the fact that as I'm filming this video, most of them are still in bed, many of them are having nightmares about this right here. Because two things going forward. If you produce documentaries, you have to change your release to make it that when you bring it into court next time, this won't happen. But number two, you're thinking about all the documentaries you just put out. And if they signed a release like this and you made them look bad, they can come into court and say, hey, got an opinion here from an appeals court that says it's okay for a plaintiff to proceed despite having signed that release. And that's a scary concept for a lot of people right about now. So like I said, in California, the producers and their lawyers are huddling and they're discussing two topics. Going forward, clean the release up. Going backward, what liability have we got with respect to documentaries we've shot recently? So there you go. By the way, the two documentaries I sat for recently, one was about Bobby Isaac, the guy who drove this car, and another one I can't tell you about. I will when it comes out, but it's tied to an announcement. And I know people hate those kinds of things, but if I don't mention the documentaries, people are going to ask. So I'm answering the question right there as best I can. I am not allowed to talk about one of them. The other one I can, but I assure you that when they come out, you will be the first to know. There you go. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Failure is like free tuition.